On May 10, 1869, at a remote, windswept spot in the Utah Territory called Promontory Summit, two locomotives stood cow-catcher to cow-catcher, the Jupiter from the east and number 119 from the west. For 6 years, two massive corporations, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, had been locked in a frenzied, often vicious race to connect a fractured, still healing United States. What happened next wasn't just a political ceremony. It was the birth of modern America. But this story isn't about the politicians or the millionaires in the silk hats. It's about the men who bled, blasted, and burrowed their way through a continent. Jude Dynamite O'Connell, an Irish Union Pacific foreman whose crew laid the single greatest length of track in a single day, 10 miles, a record that stands unbroken. He was racing not just a rival company, but the ghosts of his past. Ah Lin, a brilliant, essential Chinese Central Pacific laborer whose knowledge of explosives saved countless lives, yet whose name would never be recorded on any ledger. A casualty of systemic American racism and a historical footnote to the very creation he helped forge. And Dr. Evelyn Reed, a forgotten geologist and amateur botanist who crisscrossed the forbidding Sierra Nevada, providing the essential, unheralded maps and geological data that allowed the Central Pacific to blast the Iron Curtain of mountains, a woman fighting for relevance and recognition in a man's world. This is the true, gritty, and astonishing story of the Transcontinental Railroad, a 1,907-mile iron behemoth built with sheer will, dynamite, and the uncredited toil of thousands. It's a tale of greed, innovation, sacrifice, and the astonishing realization of a dream that cut the travel time from New York to San Francisco from 6 months to 6 days. This is the story of how America stopped being two coasts and finally became one nation. Part 1. The Sierra Wall, 1863. Chapter 1. Granite and Gunpowder. California, 1863. The wind that ripped through the Sierra Nevada was a hungry beast, smelling of pine, ice, and unworked granite. It clawed at the men huddled around small, sputtering fires. To the east, the land fell away into a wilderness of snow-capped peaks and deep, unforgiving canyons, the literal and psychological barrier between the promise of California and the vast, unsettled continent. Ah Lin didn't feel the cold as much as the weight of the mountain. He stood near the entrance of Tunnel Number 1, barely a promising scar on the face of the mountain, and rubbed his scarred hands. His job was a silent, lethal alchemy, mixing the volatile black powder that would crack the Sierra's granite heart. He'd arrived in San Francisco with a few pieces of silver, a tattered family charm, and a knowledge of mining explosives gleaned from his father's work in the copper mines of Guangdong. He was one of nearly 12,000 Chinese immigrants who would eventually do the most dangerous, essential work for the Central Pacific Railroad, CP. Yet he was paid a pittance, often less than the white laborers, and subjected to brutal conditions. "Hey, Chinaman, you done with that paste? Or are we gonna wait till the damn cherry blossoms bloom?" The voice belonged to a ganger named Patterson, a brute whose authority stemmed from his size and a deep-seated contempt for anyone who wasn't Irish or American-born. Ah Lin ignored the slur, his eyes focused on the powder's consistency. A fine, dark dust, mixed just right with oil and moisture to make a pliable, powerful paste. Too wet, and it sputtered. Too dry, and it failed to pack, wasting precious energy. He knelt, checked the depth of a drill hole, a jump-down hole, drilled by hand with a 2-man crew, swinging 9-pound hammers against a chisel. It was only 3 feet deep, a meager result for 4 hours of relentless labor against stone as hard as diamond. "Hole is good, Mr. Patterson. Ready for powder." Ah Lin sneered. "Just make sure it actually moves something this time. This whole mountain is a goddamn rock wall. The Union Pacific is laying track on flat ground out east, probably doing 10 miles a day. We're getting 10 feet. Patterson's frustration was entirely justified. The CP's chief engineer, Teddy, the crazy Ude they called him, had died, and the Big Four investors, Leland Stanford, Collis Huntington, Mark Hopkins, and Charles Crocker, were pressuring the remaining engineers, like James Strobridge, for results. They were trapped in a granite prison, and the clock was ticking. Every mile gained by the UP meant millions of dollars in land grants and bonds lost to the CP. Aline didn't need the numbers. He needed to survive the blast. He packed the powder, set the fuse, a tricky, unreliable coil of rope and pitch, and shouted the warning in a clear, ringing tone. "Fire in the hole!" The men scrambled for cover, hunkering behind massive granite boulders. Aline counted silently, the seconds stretching into an eternity. 10. 9. 8. He didn't cover his ears. He was listening for the right sound. Not a slow, fizzling burn, but a sharp, clean crack. Chapter 2. The Mapmaker's Crusade. Sacramento, California. Earlier that year. The office of the Central Pacific was a cacophony of shouting, sawdust, and the constant rhythmic clanging of the blacksmiths working below. It was an environment designed for men, but Dr. Evelyn Reed had long since learned how to make herself heard. Evelyn was 32, sharp-featured, and dressed in a traveling suit made of practical, dark wool, a stark contrast to the bustles and silks of city women. She had a Ph.D. in geology from a German university, a feat almost unheard of for a woman in 1863, and a deep, intimate knowledge of the Sierra Nevadas formations. She stood before Charles Crocker, the most aggressive of the Big Four, a stout, florid-faced man who only respected two things: profit and brute force. "Mr. Crocker, your current tunnel plans are inefficient, sir." Evelyn laid out a meticulously rendered, hand-drawn map. It showed the cross-section of the mountains near Donner Pass. Crocker leaned back, chewing on an unlit cigar. "Inefficient? We've got Strobridge pouring 5,000 men into those holes, and they're digging 24 hours a day. What would you know about efficiency, Doctor?" He didn't even look at her nameplate. "I know this," Evelyn said, tapping a red pencil on her map. "Your engineers are tunneling straight through the granodiorite batholith, the hardest possible stone. They are wasting valuable weeks on a formation that is structurally unsound for a deep bore, not to mention agonizingly slow." She pointed to a spot slightly higher on the ridge. "If you adjust the line by 1 degree north, the entire route shifts into a vein of mica schist. It's still hard, but far more fissured. We can move 3 times as fast with the same amount of powder. More importantly, the schist is less likely to collapse after the blasting, saving you time and lives." Crocker frowned. "And how, pray tell, did you find this mica schist vein?" "I walked it, sir. I surveyed it. I didn't rely on the old government charts, which are wholly inaccurate. They were drawn on men on horseback. I was on foot, charting the geological composition, the water tables, and the seismic fault lines." There was a silence. Crocker didn't trust women. He certainly didn't trust academics, but he absolutely hated losing money or time. "And if you're wrong, Doctor? Then I leave and I never ask for a cent. But if I'm right," Evelyn met his gaze, her tone iron firm, "you give me a full commission to consult on the rest of the Sierra bores, and you guarantee the safety and adequate compensation for the laborers who implement the change, specifically the Chinese crews who handle the explosives." Crocker squinted at her, considering the audacity of the demand. The railroad was a cutthroat business, but the thought of accelerating the digging— "All right, Doctor," he grunted, slamming his hand on the desk. "You get one chance. You find us the weak point in that mountain, and you can map the whole Sierra for all I care. But if you waste my time, you'll be on the next boat back to wherever you came from." Evelyn simply nodded, a thin, triumphant smile touching her lips. She rolled up her map, tied it with a piece of twine, and left the office, heading straight for the mountain she knew better than any man in the room. Her compass was her weapon, and the earth was her ledger. The race was on, and her insight was the only edge the Central Pacific had.